So in terms of research planning, this really comes down to formulating effective searches and also, refining searches along the way. So research is a really organic process. You don't often get it 100% right first time, but a good place to start when you get a research task is to, read the question and think about what do you need to know to be able to answer that question. So this involves you breaking the question down into key concepts. And then when you have those key concepts, thinking about, okay, so what phrases relate to those key concepts? What synonyms for the concept or synonyms for the phrases could be used by a particular author? Noting as well that if you're looking at Australian and overseas commentary, the overseas commentators might refer to the concepts in a slightly different way. So it's about having, I guess, that insight and knowledge around the types of terms that might help you, turn up relevant information. Another thing that you might like to think about is whether the writers in that field use particular acronyms. For example, in the field that I research in IP, IP is the acronym for intellectual property. And another one that is quite, frequently comes up is TK, or traditional knowledge. Being all over these matters will help you, widen your search effectively, or alternatively narrow your search if you're only looking at one particular aspect of a problem. In terms of building searches, I mentioned earlier that research is a very organic process. So along the way, after you do your first, for example, database search, you might notice that you have too many sources. So you might exclude certain sources by using and between two concepts, or alternatively, you might have too few sources. So you might want to use two of your synonyms with an or between it in the search string. So it's just something to keep in mind. To be able to do research tasks in general, you really do need to get a handle on database searches, okay? So catalogue searches can turn up relevant information. I'm not saying it can't, but if you literally just type the question into the catalogue search bar, you're unlikely to get many of the relevant sources you'll need to be able to answer the question. So if you break the question down, you'll be better placed to, develop effective searches. And then you would want to look at things like case databases, both local or potentially international, depending on your question. And I find of the domestic case databases, I'm a big fan of FirstPoint, which I don't know if you've used it, but it's got really good summary information. And also occasionally there's links to journal articles too. So it can be a good way to turn up articles that you otherwise wouldn't have come across. In terms of finding commentary, Westlaw AU, Lexis Advanced Pacific are also useful. Google Scholar is another one that can be useful. But when you use Google Scholar, it's better to use it through the library website rather than just through the Google Scholar website. You get access to more materials that way. With a Google Scholar search, it's quite useful if you already know what you're looking for. It's potentially less useful if that's the first search that you've done in your whole assignment. The reason being that a lot of barely relevant materials might be turned up, okay? Which can make it hard to kind of sort through and figure out what's relevant. But if you know what you're looking for, it can be quite good. A good feature of the Google Scholar website is that you can click on the author's name and a lot of articles written by that author will come up. Alternatively, there's a cited by feature. So if there's one, article that you've identified is quite key to the field, it might have been cited 20 times. You could click on the cited by feature and then those 20 articles, which are also listed potentially in Google Scholar, will turn up. So it's a good way of, following the bouncing ball with your research trail. Another thing you can also do in terms of following the bouncing ball is once you've identified one journal article, obviously read it. And then from there, see who they're citing, see what authors keep coming up, see what, titles of journal articles look like they might be on topic. And then you can search for those articles then in a catalogue search or a Google Scholar search. And if it's not in either, you could also search through the institution, so the employer of the academic, through the website, so through that person's staff profile, because many universities now require staff like publications to be distributed under an open access policy. which means that on the staff profiles of the academics, sometimes, not always, but sometimes you can click on the article that they've written and there'll be an open access version of that article there. So that's another way to kind of turn up relevant information. What else do I have here? You can get ebooks. There's ebooks available through the library catalogue, which can be quite useful. If there's a book that you're wanting that isn't in a library, there's no ebook available through the library catalogue, you could have a look and see if it's available on Google Books. Many books have a preview function through Google Books. And what that means is if, for example, you had read a quote from a particular book chapter in one of the journal articles you'd identified as relevant, you could then input that quote into a search of the book through Google Books, and then the page where that quote comes from, you might be able to get access to that page. Not necessarily the whole book, but access to that page. So you'll be able to see if it's relevant, see if it's something you want to use, see if there's anything else relevant, potentially in the page before or after, or that chapter as a whole, that might be useful. But just note the books that are available through Google Books, often they have a page limitation. So you might get 30 pages, you might get 5. It depends, okay? So whatever you're searching for, if you're searching, for example, for a quote, make sure that's the first page that you look at so you don't get locked out from the book before you have a chance to check the quote. Yeah, in terms of using textbooks, textbooks can be a really useful way to, I guess, get a good general handle on a topic area and what, concepts and phrases might be useful to be able to conduct your searches. But one thing I don't want you to do is to be citing a textbook as if it's a primary source. That's quite a common mistake with students, that they'll read a description of a case in a textbook, and then when they're describing a case in their research essay, they'll then cite the textbook. That's not what I want you to do. If you're talking about a case, you need to be citing the case. You need to be looking it up in first point, actually reading it, and then, doing your summary. But then, like I said, textbooks can be useful, particularly at the early stage of the research process, to help you get a handle on the issues that are implicated by the question. The library has some really useful links around how to find various types of sources and the databases that are relevant to finding those sources. So make sure you look at those. Note as well that the Get It and Bonus Plus features through the library are very useful when those the materials that you're looking for might not be available in the library's collection already. But for this to be, most useful for you, you actually need to start your research early.